You stand in the royal palace of Madrid, and the air is too thick to breathe. The scent of beeswax, candle smoke, and the sharp sting of preserving salts clings to your lungs. Before you lies the corpse of a king, but somehow he does not seem entirely dead. His mouth, still twisted into that familiar sneer, suggests a thought unfinished, an order left unspoken. Even the silence feels obedient, holding its breath, awaiting command. If this kind of history grips you, the kind that peers into the shadows of power, where empires rot behind velvet curtains, then you are one of us. Take a moment to join our growing archive of the curious. Subscribe, leave a mark of your presence below, and tell us, from which corner of the world are you watching? Tonight, Madrid may be the stage, but stories like this remind us that history's ghosts speak in every language. The year is 1833. Ferdinand VII of Spain is dead. Officially, the cause is gout, exhaustion, perhaps the cumulative rot of royal living. But in the corridors of his palace, no one quite believes that the king has truly gone. His death, like his reign, refuses to find peace. The guards still whisper that they hear footsteps in the royal apartments, though the door is sealed. Courtiers cross themselves when they pass the Hall of Columns, where the body lies in state beneath an ocean of crimson silk. The corpse rests atop a dais draped in gold, his scepter placed upon his chest, the royal banner folded neatly at his side. Every candle flame seems to tremble in sympathy, throwing nervous shadows across the marble floor. Outside, the city hums with the low murmur of uncertainty, the kind that comes when power passes from one trembling hand to another. Spain, after all, had been kept hostage by this man's body long before death claimed it. His rule was a study in paralysis. Ministers exiled, constitutions burned, promises broken. And now, even in death, his flesh commands attention. The physicians hover at a distance, murmuring prayers that sound more like apologies. They have been summoned not merely to embalm, but to examine, to discover whether the king's suffering had a cause deeper than politics, a cause written into the bone and blood of Spain's most inbred dynasty. Dr. Vicente Linares, the royal physician, removes his gloves and looks upon the corpse with the weary caution of a man who knows too much. He had tended to Ferdinand for years, endured his rages, his paranoia, his unpredictable kindness that always hid cruelty behind it. "We must proceed," he murmurs, his voice steady though his hands tremble. Her Majesty demands the preservation be completed before dawn. The Queen Regent, Maria Cristina, waits nearby, her mourning veil quivering in the candlelight. Her face is carved in restraint, but her eyes reveal calculation. Not grief, but necessity. She knows that the moment her husband's body ceases to be king, Spain will erupt into the question of succession. Their daughter, Isabella, is barely 3. The Carlist factions already sharpen their knives. Time itself feels like an enemy. The first incision is made beneath the ribs. A hiss of escaping gases breaks the silence. One physician recoils, another crosses himself. The scent of camphor and decay rises in waves. Ferdinand's skin, waxen and pale, stretches tight across his chest. The doctors work quickly, methodically, but something about the body resists their touch, as though rigor mortis were not a condition but a final act of defiance. His Majesty fought death as he fought everything, one attendant whispers, half in reverence, half in fear. Yet beneath the professional rhythm of dissection, a rumor runs through the room that this autopsy is not only about preservation. Some claim the Queen wishes the cause of his many stillbirths and failed marriages to be confirmed, once and for all. Others say the Vatican has requested specific anatomical drawings, to be stored far from the public eye. Whatever the truth, each scalpel stroke feels less like medicine and more like exorcism. Outside, the bells of Madrid toll midnight. The city listens. No one sleeps easily when kings die. In taverns, the talk is of omens, the guttering candles that refuse to stay lit in the royal chapel, the horse that bolted during the funeral procession rehearsal, the old servant who swore he saw Ferdinand's portrait blink. Inside the chamber, Maria Christina's composure finally cracks. "Make him presentable," she whispers. "Spain must not see him as he truly was." Her words hang in the air like a decree of denial, a command to rewrite the final scene of a reign that was nothing but suffering. The attendants obey. The royal embalmers fill the cavities with aromatic herbs, sew the body with silken thread, smooth the face into counterfeit serenity. They bind his hands across his chest, though rigor has already clenched them into fists. When they step back, the transformation is uncanny. The tyrant now looks like a saint. The cruelty, the suspicion, the madness, all erased beneath the soft glow of candlelight. Only the faint tightening at the corners of his mouth betrays the truth, that Ferdinand VII, even dead, refuses to surrender his grip on Spain. Hours pass. The physicians depart, leaving behind their instruments glistening with the residue of power. The Queen retreats to her chapel, where she kneels before the Virgin and whispers not prayers, but calculations. Outside, the first light of dawn creeps across Madrid, pale and uncertain. The king's corpse remains where it lies, caught between reverence and revulsion, preserved for eternity yet already decomposing in history's memory. In the echoing halls of the palace, the candles burn low, and one of the guards swears he hears movement, the faint rustle of silk, the creak of a coffin lid shifting under its own weight. By morning, the embalmers will seal the body, but those who kept vigil through the night will never forget what they saw, or what they thought they saw. In that flickering light, Spain's dead monarch seemed not at rest, but waiting. And somewhere in the hush of dawn, a single question takes shape. What, exactly, did they fear this corpse might still reveal? The Bourbon palace was a mausoleum of faces. Portraits stared from the walls. Centuries of kings and queens with the same slack jaw, the same pale eyes, the same expression of weary sanctity. Oil on canvas could not disguise what blood had already decided. Each face bore the faint watermark of decline. Somewhere between God's design and human arrogance, the royal family had turned itself into a living experiment in controlled decay. Ferdinand VII's story did not begin in the nursery, but in a marriage contract inked generations earlier. The House of Bourbon had inherited Spain from the Habsburgs, but not their lesson. The Habsburgs had already demonstrated what happens when bloodlines coil too tightly. A dynasty so interwoven it could hardly breathe. Yet the Bourbons, craving divine legitimacy, repeated the same formula with fresh confidence. Cousin to cousin, niece to uncle, purity over vitality. They believed their children were born closer to heaven. In truth, they were born closer to collapse. To the outside world, these unions glittered with ceremony. Organs thundered in cathedral naves, choirs sang of divine sanction, and royal heralds declared each wedding a triumph of blood. But behind the velvet curtains, the reality was far less divine. Children were stillborn. Heirs grew sickly and dim. Portrait painters subtly altered features to mask the creeping deformities. And when courtiers whispered about the curse of the crown, no one dared speak of genetics. A word yet unborn, though every midwife and physician knew the truth by instinct. By the late 18th century, this ancient machinery of inbreeding produced Ferdinand. His father, Charles IV, was an amiable man of limited intellect, fond of hunting and music, content to let others rule. His mother, Maria Luisa of Parma, was spirited and cunning, but her own ancestry read like a circle. Bourbon wed to Bourbon, generation upon generation. Together they created a child who seemed, even in infancy, both fragile and furious. Contemporary letters from the palace describe an infant with a curious head, overlarge and ill-shaped, prone to fits of screaming that no nurse could soothe. His tutors later noted that he was quick to suspicion, slow to trust, and unable to endure correction. "He has inherited the obstinacy of 10 kings," one wrote. It was meant as flattery. It read like prophecy. Medical records, preserved in fragments, smudged with age, hint at deeper maladies. The boy's growth was uneven. His joints ached, his limbs developed strange proportions. There were murmurs of glandular dysfunction, of hormonal imbalance. The family physicians, bound by oath and fear, recorded symptoms in language so cautious it barely concealed the horror. An excess of vitality in one region and deficiency in others. What they meant was simple. The royal blood had grown unstable. As Ferdinand matured, so too did the peculiar Bourbon affliction of the mind, a melancholy that lingered like fog. The French ambassador to Madrid once described the royal court as a theater of piety and madness. Each member seemed caught between devotion and despair. Charles IV prayed for guidance but could not decide between his ministers. Maria Luisa plotted endlessly, driven by paranoia that her children might be stolen, replaced, or cursed. Within that fevered household, Ferdinand learned early that love was conditional, loyalty was dangerous, and faith was a weapon. He grew into a man who mistrusted kindness. His tutors observed it, his confessor recorded it. "The prince looks upon friendship as contagion," wrote Father Andrada in 1796. "He believes himself surrounded by enemies, and in this he may not be entirely mistaken." The irony was cruel. A boy bred to rule, yet incapable of trust. A king born to inspire loyalty, yet haunted by the fear that no one truly served him. The Spanish people, suffering beneath the weight of misrule, projected their despair onto their prince. When Ferdinand came of age, pamphlets celebrated him as El Deseado, the desired one, the future savior who would redeem Spain from his father's corruption. They saw in his brooding silence a reflection of their own humiliation. They mistook sickness for strength, resentment for resolve. It was the oldest illusion of monarchy, to confuse human fragility with divine depth. Even as Spain decayed, the court remained fixated on appearances. The family portraits continued, each new monarch painted with the same sterile reverence. Yet if you looked closely, at the thinning lips, the ashen complexions, the heavy eyelids, you could see time itself retreating. The Bourbon line had become a closed circuit, feeding on its own sanctity until sanctity curdled into sickness. And so Ferdinand inherited not only a throne, but a pattern, a body that betrayed him, a mind that distrusted its own reflection, a soul trained to mistake pain for purpose. When he ascended the throne, he carried in his veins a genealogy of failure. His reign would not merely mirror the deformity of his bloodline, it would magnify it. The same rituals of control that once governed the royal marriage bed would soon govern the empire. As the candles guttered in those endless palace halls, the portraits seemed to lean closer, their painted eyes following him. Generations of the devout and the damned, whispering the same unbroken truth. This is what happens when blood forgets to breathe. And beneath that silent gallery, in the nursery of his firstborn, stillborn of course, the air hung heavy with incense and decay. Somewhere between the prayers and the weeping, a midwife muttered what no courtier dared to say aloud. The gods made kings from their own blood, but even gods can make mistakes. By the final decade of Ferdinand VII's reign, the royal palace of Madrid had grown quieter, but never truly still. Silence there was not peace, it was surveillance. The marble corridors, the endless mirrors, the gilded ceilings, all seemed designed to reflect him back upon himself. The servants moved like ghosts, trained to avoid eye contact, to bow not only out of duty but fear. In that hallowed grandeur, Spain's king ruled not by presence but by absence. A man who feared being seen even as he demanded constant attention. He had begun his reign promising rebirth. The people, exhausted from the Napoleonic Wars, once shouted his name as if invoking salvation. Viva el Deseado! they cried. "Long live the desired one." But the cheers had faded into whispers, and the desired one had become the feared one. Each day, Ferdinand's world narrowed, his circle of advisers shrinking, his nights growing longer, his trust dissolving like wax under flame. Inside his private apartments, the king's habits turned ritualistic, almost liturgical. He rose before dawn, pacing in his chamber while attendants waited outside, forbidden to enter until summoned by name. Every curtain had to be drawn at precise angles, every document read aloud twice, once in a whisper and again in full voice. He mistrusted handwriting, believing spies could imitate even his own. When his ministers presented decrees, he signed only after tracing the letters with a trembling finger, as though feeling for treachery in the ink. The courtiers called it eccentricity. The physicians called it mania. But to Ferdinand it was order, proof that he still governed the invisible forces conspiring to unmake him. He spoke often of purity, though not of the kind found in Scripture. Purity of loyalty, purity of intention. He began to measure devotion not in service, but in silence. Those who flattered him too quickly were dismissed as deceivers. Those who hesitated were branded traitors. Behind the locked doors of the Queen's apartments, the sound of crying became routine. His marriages, 4 in total, read like the record of a laboratory experiment conducted upon hope itself. His first 3 wives died young, one by miscarriage, another by infection, the third by despair. Court gossip whispered that the problem lay not in the women, but in the king, whose body bore the same hidden deformities as his ancestors. The autopsy reports were discreetly sealed, the chapel masses ordered without delay. Maria Cristina of Naples, his 4th queen, understood survival better than love. She smiled when he smiled, wept when he demanded it, and prayed louder than anyone else in the chapel. Yet even she could not escape the storm of his suspicion. When she grew pregnant, Ferdinand ordered her every movement observed. The royal physicians were made to swear oaths that they would report each symptom directly to him. One confessor recalled hearing the king mutter during prayer, "The womb must obey the crown." In 1830, when Maria Cristina bore him a daughter, Isabella, the palace trembled with more fear than joy. Spain had no clear provision for a female heir, and Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos, already eyed the throne. The king, fragile yet defiant, issued the pragmatic sanction, restoring the right of women to inherit the crown. It was an act both revolutionary and desperate, one last attempt to control the bloodline that had controlled him. But the gesture did not heal Spain. It fractured it. The Carlists, devoted to Don Carlos, denounced the decree as heresy. The liberal factions, once loyal to Ferdinand, turned their hopes to his widow and child. Spain split open along the same fault lines that ran through the king's mind: faith against reform, loyalty against survival. Every edict he signed became a reflection of his own torment, his obsession with legitimacy mirrored in the civil unrest gathering beyond the palace walls. In his final months, Ferdinand's body betrayed him completely. He could no longer walk unaided. Gout twisted his limbs, and his face, once proud, sagged into the caricature of his ancestors. Yet still he demanded ceremony. Each evening he ordered the great mirrors of the audience hall to be covered with black cloth. "They mock me," he told his attendants. "They repeat my sins." Only one mirror remained uncovered, the one facing his bed. He stared into it before sleeping, as though expecting to see not himself but the ghosts of kings past, judging him for breaking their bloodline's code of silence. When death finally came in 1833, it arrived like an actor entering a stage already set for tragedy. The courtiers gathered, waiting for confirmation, while Maria Cristina closed the curtains herself. The city outside held its breath. Spain's fate once again lay in the fragile body of a child and the ambitions of men. Yet, even as the embalmers prepared the corpse, the whispers persisted. Some swore they heard the king's final words, "Do not uncover the mirrors." Others claimed he died still clutching the scepter, as though afraid it might be taken. In that single gesture, Spain's last absolute monarch revealed his truest reflection, a man who spent a lifetime trying to master his shadows, only to become one of them. And as the palace bells tolled, echoing through the empty corridors, the people of Madrid looked toward the shuttered windows of the royal chamber. Behind them, the mirrors lay hidden beneath their shrouds, waiting for a new monarch to dare lift the cloth. In that unbroken silence, a kingdom stood between death and rebirth, haunted not by what it had lost, but by what it could no longer forget.